Welcome, everyone, to Behind the Human. I'm your host, Mark Champagne, and it's my job to unpack the stories and mental fitness practices of people living at the top of their game personally and professionally. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome back Leah Smart, journalist and the brilliant host of LinkedIn's Everyday Better with Leah Smart. Together, we jump into the delicate balance between striving for improvement and appreciating our current state, offering fresh perspectives on knowing when you've truly done enough.
What's been energizing you in the last week?
Ooh, what a good question, Leah. What's been energizing me this week? I think for me, just feeling in flow and really just trying to slow down a little bit to see, okay, what's working, what's not working, who are the people that are, I would say kind of right back to your question, that are energizing me versus depleting or kind of sucking energy and not answering that or taking kind of stock of that inventory with judgment and just like these are the facts, right? And just making some subtle edits here and there to I think which are all leading up to why at least I'm feeling a little bit more in flow with things, including like kind of what I'm reading and learning and the topic that we're about to discuss and so forth. So
sounds like healthy boundaries there.
Yeah. And just I'm a very visual person, so I was feeling, probably around the time when you and I spoke, really feeling like there was just too much going on, and feeling like I had to have too much going on because, on my side, on the entrepreneurial world, it's like if there's not enough kind of irons in the fire, then all of a sudden you get into you can get into a dicey spot. But at the same time, I had to visualize like how many of those irons were in the fire. And when I did that, I'm like, gosh, there's like 35, either not all like fully active projects, but active projects / actively moving, me moving these things forward. Like, okay, well, this is why I feel like my mind's about to explode. Like, this is not sustainable, right? So,
well, and you and I were talking about, when I talked to you, I also felt like there were actually different irons in the fire, right? So your work is, and I'd love for you to tell everyone again what you do, because you haven't been on the show in so long. Your work is about mental fitness. It's about teaching people how to use their minds in a way that serves their intention or their purpose or their work in more moments. And so your work, though different than mine, is also making sure that you're getting out into the world and sharing this information as an entrepreneur, which is a very different workload and different type of pressure than working inside of a company, right? So, when we started talking, I was in the place of feeling like I was overwhelmed from a perspective of information overload. So my irons in the fire were information and books and all these different things happening. Yours were leads and prospects and things. So tell us, before we even jump into that, what do you do and why does it matter?
Ooh, and I just get ready, because you definitely have to answer that same question, because it's going to be helpful as we're going to air this on my show as well. What do I do and why does it matter? You summarized it really well, but the only thing I would add, or the core through line to where I've landed to my work, is that I'm doing everything possible on a daily basis to just make mental fitness accessible to as many people as possible, because I've noticed, like, I didn't invent these practices. I'm definitely not inventing questions. I'm not the originator of breath work or visualizations and meditations and whatnot. I see my job as finding these practices, kind of being a little bit of a guinea pig and trying them out, but in very intentional settings. And in my case, in the corporate setting with teams, because I come from that world and you're in that world as well. And we all know there's no shortage of pressure and stresses inside the job, but then also as soon as we leave those walls, just externally, just life in general, it's nonstop, right? And I feel like that's kind of where you and I have been coming together and feeling like there's just so much. And I feel it on the personal development side as well, because obviously these are the individuals that are, for the most part, coming on my show, and just feeling that pressure of, I can only read so many books to prepare for interviews. In a certain capacity, like it's just not possible at times. So I'm kind of feeling both of those pressures. So all to say, I have to kind of, if I had to, follow or practice what I preach, and really just, which is kind of how I answered your first question around zoom out and take inventory of what's going on and just start to release some mental clutter to be able to fully show up for the work that I do. Because for me, to answer the second part of your question, I just first and foremost feel like every one of us individually, then collectively as teams and organizations, deserve to wake up feeling good more days than not. That's at the core of the work. And then when we do that, or when we feel like that, we also do our best thinking and our best ideation, and we see what others can't see, or we feel what others are missing because they're caught up and their minds are spinning and so forth. So it's just the ripple effect of these kind of practices, not just affects, it's not just beneficial for us individually, of course, but for our companies, and for, we can get into numbers and whatnot as well when it comes to profits and revenues and productivity and all of that. But at the core of it, just as human beings, and we all know this, everyone listening or watching knows that you've been in this situation. When you feel good, you typically do good as well.
Mm-hmm. You said I explained this well, but I would actually love to hear, how would you define mental fitness?
I see mental fitness as the umbrella term that includes really everything that we do to train our minds to work for us instead of against us. So then that includes mental health, mental performance, mental resiliency, and optimization, and so forth. And it feels, at least from the individuals I work with and teams I work with, it feels more empowering, because we can all relate to physical fitness for the most part, right? And it's the example I often use is, if you don't like to run, it doesn't rule out all of exercise, right? There's a million different things you can do, right? So same thing when it comes to mental fitness, and get this all the time, and I'm sure you resonate with it. It's like, I don't like to meditate. Well, then don't meditate.
Correct.
Do something else, and you might come back to it, but there are a million different things you can do for your mind, to train your mind to work for you, and not have to feel like it's such a grind. Kind of defeats the whole purpose of the mental fitness and mindfulness and just well-being in general, when your meditation practice is stressing you out because you're trying to keep a streak or whatever it is, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I'm going to share the what do I do and why does it matter?
Yeah.
But I do think, you and I came to this topic because we both are steeped in this work all the time. And I believe our listeners obviously take this work. And when I say this work, I mean the work of personal development. I mean the work of understanding more about yourself, building self-awareness through mental fitness, through emotional intelligence, through physical fitness, all of these things. I think most of our listeners take that very seriously and are at least, interested, if not already very much in that space and kind of on the path. And while I think it is absolutely incredible and the work of our lives, I truly do, I also believe that there is a tipping point where it goes too far. So you're bringing up sort of a topic of that I was chatting with someone else about this also. The idea of, even wellness or well-being culture, which already I think well-being and wellness get sort of a fluffy attribution to them when they simply aren't. When we talk about mental fitness, I think it sounds a little more clear for people. And if people understand that there is a science behind being well and living well, it feels, I think, more grounded. But no matter what, if you are applying the idea of performance, of pressure, of, doing something really well to any of those areas of your life, it actually may not make you more well. It may make you even more anxious, even more stressed, even more worried about whether or not you're doing it right. So that was where I found myself when you and I talked was, as much as I love all of this work, it's also difficult when you overdo it to kind of go, well, let me take a step back. You can overdo it. And when you overdo it, it loses its value.
Yes. And just one thing to add, because this was the question that really got me and where I feel like the idea started to spin and how we landed here together. You said something to the effect of, like, when is it enough? And I feel like we hear that question posed in all other circumstances of life. It's like, when is it enough money? When is it enough success? When is it enough this? But I've rarely, or feel like I haven't heard a conversation around when it comes to our development and so forth, because it just feels like a strange question to answer or ask, given, I mean, there are so many benefits of growing and evolving and so forth. But I do feel there is, to your point, a tipping point there, and where it can become, it can become destructive. So this is what I'm super excited to talk about. Yeah.
Tell me, I mean, have you and I have been doing this work for a long time, and I know your story, but I'd love to hear how you came to this work. And I also want to hear, Mark, do you remember specific experiences where you went, ooh, I'm going a little bit overboard, and how have you managed that?
I mean, I came to this work out of necessity, in the sense that I spent about a decade in the healthcare space, in the corporate world, and I always had, I wasn't calling it mental fitness at that time, but I had a reflective practice that showed up as journaling, and is still, I would say, the core practice from all of my routines and so forth. And I was just doing that for years and so forth. And then eventually came, and I'm going through this quickly because there's a lot of detail, but eventually landed to a point where, realized that there was a gap in the market for digital tools for journaling. At that time, there were a lot of meditation, not a lot. I mean, I would say Calm and Headspace were the big meditation apps that were really launching from a mainstream perspective. And there just wasn't anything that was available at that time for guiding people into a journaling practice through big questions, because that's what I was experiencing through my study of just great thinkers. And I share this because the necessity part comes next, because we launched that. It was an app. We reached a bunch of people, nearly 90 million people in the first couple of years. And despite reaching that a number of people, the business model wasn't working, and we had to shut it down. And that's a whole other podcast in itself. But in that moment, Leah, is where I, for the first time in my life, felt hopeless. Because I had no path forward. I had no strategy to get myself out of the situation. It was just, wow, I just spent 3 years building this business and this app with the team, and we had all of these aspirations and desires, and we could see we were helping people just based on the comments coming back. And within a second of, looking at my computer and the Apple dashboard, I hit delete. It was gone. Gone, just completely wiped out. And now what? And that's where, had it not, because I was working in the health space prior in the corporate world, and I was working in mental health as well. So I knew the signs of depression. I'd never been in a depression prior to that, but I could see where I was going. And I was going into a deep kind of dark place. And it was a combination of, okay, this is not ending well if I don't do something, and I have to make my full-time job at this point my mind. And that was hanging on to the gym membership that at that point I couldn't afford, but just to move the body. And then at a place too that, had a sauna in the change room, so I would meditate or do some breath work and just visualize, the path forward and whatnot, and then journal and gratitude. Everything, Leah. At that point, I probably had interviewed definitely over 100 people at that point, not where I'm at now, but enough, to see, okay, well, people have been in this situation in various circumstances in the past. What did they tell me, essentially? And just pull everything possible. And I really believe it saved, I'm not going to say it saved my life. I don't think I was at that point, but it definitely prevented a very steep path down, which is what I was definitely feeling. And from that point forward, have just made it my mission, because I'm not anything unique or special in this situation. I wasn't going on, 14-day silent retreats. Not that there's anything wrong with those things, but these were the small little micro, adjustments and edits and moments of just calming the mind down and resetting over and over again that I feel like we all have access to, and we don't have to sit in such mental torture that many of us are in, almost daily in some capacity.
Yeah, I mean, I love the fact that, well, I don't love that your story came out of hardship, but I do think a lot of people, I wish no hardship on you, but I do think that a lot of people get to this work from a place of necessity, as you mentioned. I almost think it's like a rite of passage in some ways in this work that you come to it because for whatever reason, you're saying to yourself, there has to be a better way. And you don't know what that way is, but this ends up being the path you take, is this exploration of the work of personal development, the work of understanding more about yourself and the human experience and others and what the greats have done, and how you can use your mind and your body in a way to actually work for you, and how you can feel more empowered within your mind. Because I think actually, like, of all the things that can make us feel disempowered, it's our minds. And when I say mind, I don't mean brain. I mean the software that exists in our minds that is a combination of all of the experiences we've had, many of which in childhood that have programmed us in a specific way and not force us, but automatically look at the world in one way. And the belief that that's the only way to look at the world and that we don't have control over that perspective. So I think it gets to a point where you go, God, there has to be a better way because this software needs an upgrade. And I can't keep working with what I have. And so I definitely relate to your story that, like, I got here because I had always been sort of interested in, like, different things around self-development. I love the self-help aisle at Barnes & Noble. Like, as a kid, I loved going there and, and I loved all sorts of all the weird stuff over there. But I got here more as an adult because I found myself in a place where I was like, oh, I'm also sliding down. And I had never been in a depression, but I felt like the circumstances around me, the work I was doing, the place I was living, I mean, all of it, my mindset, everything could have led me to a place where I would have to be dealing with my own mental health in a different way than just being able to sort of like get up and meditate and journal and all those things. I felt like it would have been a little more intense.
What were those signs for you though in that moment?
What were the signs for me?
Yeah, like how did you start to know that, okay, I'm going down this path? Like what were those little signs, those little breadcrumbs for you?
When I first started work, I've never been much of a student. I loved learning, but for whatever reason, school wasn't it, but work has always been something that's so exciting. When I first started working, I would like jump out of bed and I would be like the only person I knew who was like dancing and getting excited to get to work and turning on music and all these things and really excited to face the day and whatever came and all that. And I didn't feel that. I didn't want to get out of bed and dance around. I didn't love my work. And that is really, not everyone feels this way, but for me, that's key. Things like just that extra moment when you're sitting down and you should work out. And it's not the moment where you're like, I don't feel like it. It's the like a little bit more that feels a little bit heavier. That's like, ooh, okay, something's a little bit different here. Or, even food, recognizing how I was relating to food. For me, it's like when I'm overeating, I know something's up. And it may not always be some deep thing. It could just be I'm trying to, and many of us do this, trying to soothe some part of myself with food, or soothe the stress or something. So those were some of the things. And also just noticing how I related to others. So I was noticing that I wasn't my normal, like joyful, kind of more buoyant self. Sure. I felt heavier. I felt like I wasn't leaving people better than I found them. I felt like I was leaving them. And that's a lot of pressure to put on yourself, I think.
That feels heavy.
But it did feel like, I was like, ooh, I do feel like how we talked about at the beginning of this, I think I was more of an energy drain than someone who is at least coming and leaving with energy that felt restorative or loving or calm or kind.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, because I think it's so easy for us to fall onto autopilot and miss all of those cues. I mean, and many of what you shared, I can relate to directly, and I'm sure a lot of people, on the other side listening, are there as well, right? And it's not. I mean, I would invite everyone to not view that as from a place of judgment or self-judgment, but just gathering data, right? And then we have the opportunity to make some subtle changes, and it doesn't have to be all today, but just, okay, well, here are some things that are a bit off. So maybe spending a bit of time quieting the mind, and whether, again, there are a million different practices, whether that's pen to paper or just taking time to think, right? Often at least starts to surface, some paths forward.
Well, Mark, I mean, I know we wanted to talk about what it means to take a break, but I am curious as we go through kind of like chronologically, you had this moment and then you came to this experience out of necessity, and then you started discovering some of these tools and looking around and saying, hey, I've talked to enough people that I know that this isn't a totally unique experience, right? That's the other thing, is when you're in this feeling of whether it's high stress, overwhelm, burnout, or you're headed for, that feeling of depression or the real experience of depression, you feel like you're the only one. Yeah. Right? Nobody else has been through this, right? And the reality is so many have. So, for someone like you who's become an expert in this space, you turn to what other people had done. What are some of your favorite sort of techniques and tools that helped you get through that difficult time? Because I think that's what happens is you have this difficult experience, you realize there has to be a better way. If you are resourceful and curious, you will go searching for that better way. Something will work for you, hopefully. And then I think similar for both of us, then you go real deep into it. So what happened with the something that worked for you? What were those tools?
I think that the main thing was really prioritizing my mental and internal environment. And what I mean by that is ensuring that whatever was coming in was what I needed in that moment. And it actually links to I think a question I didn't fully answer previously, is that this is why I do what I do, especially in the podcast side of things, is that essentially what we have the great opportunity to do is to learn from, all these brilliant humans that go deep in specific subjects, and then be able to, blast that out to the world while we're also getting the benefits of that. And in those moments when I was in my lowest of the lows, I had to surround myself with what I would call mentors from afar. And I didn't know, a lot of those individuals, and they shift. I still have these people in my life, but I needed the playlist of motivation. I needed the experts of, okay, really realigning and making sure I'm on purpose, or that I'm following the path that feels more right for me. And people listening, who some of those people are for you. And we've interviewed many of them as well. And it's just curating that playlist for your mind versus just, letting yourself go into autopilot, and then all of a sudden all you're consuming is kind of fear-based content, right? Or anxiety kind of provoking or content, and depressive thoughts and whatnot. I mean, it's just, I wish this wasn't the case, but if we just do nothing, well, I mean, we know where that leads. We see the statistics globally. I mean, we're in a mental health crisis right now. And so we have to do something, right? We have to do something. And for me, it was just curating, just like the physical environment. If we think of food as well, making sure that if your home is stocked well with just good quality food, you're much more likely to just eat more nutritiously, right? Same thing. What is your mental nutrition don't make it so grandiose. What is it for this week? Like, what do I need this week? And then you can expand out for, the year or the month or whatever it is. But let's just make it manageable for, this week I'm going to focus here. And that's enough. Coming back to your what is enough, like that is enough. And you're almost guaranteed to feel better knowing that you're curating that kind of content, because you know what you're putting into your mind.
What was some of the content you curated? For people who have no idea where to begin, right?
I mean, at that time, I needed I needed to know, I needed hits of inspiration around trusting the journey.
Mm-hmm.
I needed to know that, and I knew that people, like you hear the stories all the time, they've gone, hit rock bottom and, that was the big moment or whatever, and there was a shift and so forth. I knew all of that, but I needed reminders of that because I think the science is something to the effect of you need 3 positives to counterbalance 1 negative. So again, if you go into the philosophy of we're just getting hit with negativity all day.
And we have negativity bias, right? So It's like your mind is already programmed to look for the negative so that it can keep you safe from the outside world.
Exactly.
So it's like living in New York, I go, God, yeah, I'm hyper vigilant about some of the negative. I can spot like a bird pooping, Yeah. I'm like, am I under it?
Exactly. Shift right.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So at that time, it was very much just reinforcing and reminding my mind of those stories, So there was a lot of, I would think probably like Mel Robbins, Rich Roll, kind of Lewis Howes, like usual suspects in those arenas that I know that they're bringing on guests speaking of those stories as well. And it's always seasons. Like right now, right now I'm really focused on, and this links to our conversation, on just letting some of this stuff go, and just sitting in more stillness. So with that in mind, I don't have as many of these, in my case, it's podcasts, but then also, of course, books, but just being intentional with what I'm going to be reading, this week, for example, is around stilling the mind and slowing down and just helping me, get back to that place and so forth. Right. And then, next month might be something different based on what's going on. But I think like that's been the big realization and I've been thinking about this since we last spoke about this topic, is just the idea of seasons, and figuring out what season we're in. And you can time align these as well nicely with nature, of course, but just thinking, am I in a full-on expansion mode? Do I need some time in silence? Because we do need all those seasons. Like we can't put our minds through a 12 to 14 hour high intensity workout day in and day out without any recovery. Like it just doesn't work, right? So that's what's worked for me. Point. But Leah, I feel like you're just being your incredibly talented and gifted interviewer self, where your questions just naturally flow in. And I feel like I'm not getting any of your story.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tell me, what would be helpful now? I'm trying to think of like, what would be, tell me.
I think based on where I really want to come back to this topic of what is enough. When it comes to like us evolving as individuals and our self-development and so forth. And I guess for you, why and when did you first ask that question, and how have you been handling, the response, or how have you been thinking about, just, I guess, self-regulating a little bit more when it comes to self-development?
Yeah. So I, and yes, God, I am an interviewer, as are you. And it's so hard to like come out of that place. So thanks for calling me out. I think the reason that we wanted to have this conversation is because, there are many people who do this work. Some of them are sharing, and they're doing what we're doing. They have podcasts, they have social media presences, et cetera. They're of all sorts of ways of sharing. And some aren't. Some are just people who are really curious and interested, which honestly, if my life had gone any differently, that would have been me. I would have been the person who continued to be interested, but I would have done potentially, other work. But the what is enough question has been one that I've been thinking about probably for like 4 years. And the reason is, actually it came out of a training I did. I was certified in the Enneagram. And for those of you who don't know what the Enneagram is, it is a personality typing system that is one of the most powerful things I have ever worked with. It shares essentially what your core motivators are and then how to grow. And it's really practical. It's really fantastic. I learned something about my the type that I resonate most with, my core type, which is type 7, that gluttony is something that we are prone to. And gluttony in anything, essentially the 7 believes more is better. And I went, oh God. I laughed when I heard it and I went, oh God.
Yeah.
And so more is better can go all sorts of ways. And as most of us know, moderation is typically the best way forward in anything, especially when you're in it for the long haul. So, I found that I was asking that question of myself with everything. How much is enough money to make? How much is enough food to have in the fridge? Especially after COVID, I found myself becoming one of those people who was like, the hoarder I never thought I'd become. I'm like, why do I have, all of this kale? Like, did I really need it? Somebody else needed it. And so I was asking those kind of questions, kind of being silly, but then also being very serious. And I found myself at a point where like I've burned out twice in my career. And I can typically tell when it's coming, but sometimes I let it go really far until I get to that point because I'm just like wanting to work. I felt that burnout coming in this work. So I was, I am someone who, if you tell me about an audiobook and I'm interested, I'm buying it now. And I'll probably start it tonight, like, and I'll have it alongside my 7 other audiobooks that are going, and I'm reading a book that's on my nightstand. And so that's actually like I look at that as a huge strength. Like I can take in a lot of information. And it's part of how I feel like I made myself dangerous enough to be in the role I'm in today, because I was, when I got into this work, I was like, oh, I have to know more and I want to know more and I've got to go deep, and I'm so happy to do it. And I will take, much of my precious time to really sit and learn. But, that was a season for me. That was the season of moving into the career I'm in now and becoming the person I've become now. That had to happen. What I found is I never turned the spigot off. I never turned the water off, so it was like, I continued to buy audiobooks. I continue to keep doing all this stuff. I'm spending so much time on my walks, on my, everything, kind of taking in this information. And then it tipped into a point where I felt like I became a problem looking for a solution everywhere. It was like whack-a-mole. Because when it comes to personal development, which I think, again, it can get a little bit of like a fluffy rap. But again, we're talking about like the idea of mental fitness, the idea of emotional fitness, understanding yourself so you can be a better person for yourself, for other people in the world, for the people that you relate to every single day that you're around. The whole point of this work is to become better so that you can support your corner of the world and you can change it. And so that is really powerful stuff. But I was finding that I was constantly, I could hear a thing and go, oh, maybe that's something I should be working on. Oh, maybe that's something I should be working on. And so I felt this sense of overwhelm, this oncoming burnout of like, I'm actually not really living anymore. I'm just taking all this information in and trying to fix so many problems that I can't even necessarily say are real. And so all I felt like, I felt in my body, I was like, I got to stop. Like I got to scale back. So that's how I kind of got here, was all of those things, and then realizing that I had a desire for way more simplicity and going, if I could just do 2 things in a day, what would it be? If I could listen to 1 book all year, what would I listen to?
I like that.
Yeah.
Have you tried taking a mini sabbatical in personal development?
Well, I had, it's funny. So I promised myself I wouldn't buy any more Audible books, and I wouldn't buy any more physical books. That tends to be the area where I go really deep, and Audible is easy for me because I'm walking a lot. I have dogs and I like being outside. So, and I honestly, funny enough, Mark, I don't really listen to very many podcasts. I'm not really like, I know, right? Correct. I'm like, once you do it, you're like, well, I prefer audiobooks to podcasts, but I started doing that, and it's funny, things naturally creep back in because this is our work. So I've had to temper, like, I'm not reading all of this book right now. I'm going to shift how I relate to this information. So my sabbatical has kind of started, but I don't know that I can go on a complete one, if I'm being honest.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and for sure. And I asked that question from someone that hasn't completely gone on one either, and is asking personally, because you're like, I'm looking at my desk and looking at thinking of upcoming interviews, and I'm looking at these galley books sitting there.
Yep.
I mean, right. You have to read some of the book and get a good idea on kind of what's going on. So there's the work aspect to it. But I find, at least for me, what's been helpful is releasing the pressure of, I have to finish all of these books, and just looking, and I've been actually doing more audible versions these days as well, but just actually skipping to sections that I feel are at least most appropriate for where I'm at, or what season I'm in, and making that okay, or that enough. And then and now find myself, maybe in a few months coming back to that same book and jumping in somewhere else. And it seems subtle, but it feels so much lighter in that sense.
Yeah,
right?
Totally.
And I think just giving ourselves, some space to just, maybe this week I'm not going to consume. Whatever that level is, like your reduced consumption, when it comes to this, when I say consumption, I'm talking specifically, positive mental nutrition, and just taking a bit of a break, and letting that sit, and asking some bigger, like open-ended questions around, what am I hearing? Like what am I pretending not to know, or what's coming up for me? Just like some check-in questions, right? And it's always amazing when we let our minds breathe a little bit, what starts to surface. And it's hard for that stuff to surface if we're just continually, and this is where I think you and I were guilty of this and why we're having this episode, but to just continually stuff our minds just like it was a physical room. It's like we're just loading the spare room with boxes of valuable things. But then at one point, someone's like, hey, can you go get that thing over there? I'm like, yeah, it's in there, but I have to empty out the entire room to get it.
Yeah.
Right? Which I'll get it, but it's going to be annoying and frustrating. It's going to take time. And I feel like our minds have turned into that. We just can't see it. I mean, the physical manifestation usually of that, of that scenario is then we just feel full. Mentally full.
It's enough. Yeah.
Exactly.
It's more than enough. Yeah.
Exactly. So we just need, because I think there is an alternative, right? I mean, if you stick with that analogy, and if you think of a bunch of beautiful knowledge and content jammed in a room floor to ceiling, the alternate version of that is a beautiful library. A lot of information in there, but it's organized, and it's, you can retrieve it fast and keep the aisles clear, kind of thing. And I think we can all do that. And that's where, if we find 3 to 5 rituals or practices for us that feels good for us, maybe it's the long walk, and just make sure those things are naturally woven into the schedule, doesn't feel forced, then we're subtly cleaning the mind every week. And it doesn't become a thing.
Yeah. I mean, when you think about, I relate this a lot to the idea of people who are overachievers too, because I think whether it's personal development or something else, all of us, or many of us who are overachievers tend to overfill, right? Because we're trying so hard to, I think ultimately get to the point where we think we're enough, overachieving. This is not coming from a scientific place, but I'm like, the reason I try to overachieve is because I want to be seen as and to feel like I'm enough. And so it's interesting. It keeps my mind going. But ultimately, when I go to the bottom of it, I go, oh, well, there's overachieving, there's underachieving. There's like, I know that I'm not doing enough. But when is it enough is a question that's hard for an overachiever, I think, to answer, because we feel like it's never enough. We have to keep going in whatever area we're in. And that is what I think ultimately leads to burnout. I just think the irony of the kind of sabbatical we're talking about is the whole field of personal development is to help make yourself better.
Yeah.
It's not to burn you out. It's not to like do all of the things that I honestly assumed weren't possible in this field.
Yeah. Well, I just, ironically, and this wasn't planned, but this week I read an article in Monocle magazine, and I wrote this down. It was exactly around this topic, kind of like be all you can be, and also though just accept the present and live.
Chill.
Yeah, exactly.
Chill out.
Which feel like those feel like extremes. So I guess for me is trying to think again that I think we're always in balance. It's never, or we're always trying to find the balance, and the scale may tip one way, more one month and the other way the next month, and I think that's okay. I think giving ourselves the permission that it's okay, but we have to check in. Like there's nothing, if we're not checking in with ourselves, and this is kind of the strategist in me coming out. It's the same thing with a business. If you're not looking at your metrics and checking in with the business, then all of a sudden you get to this point where, like, oh, so we've run out of money. So something happened along the way here that has led to this, right? But for whatever reason, we don't do those kind of check-ins for ourselves and our minds around, well, how do I feel today? Like what's one word to describe how my mind feels? And if it feels, I don't know, anxious, and well, where do you feel that in your body? And so what's fueling that? I mean, this takes minutes, sometimes less than a minute. But those emotions are coming into the day with us, whether we like it or not. And at least if we can just slow down and check in, then we can start to understand, okay, well, I'm seeing some patterns here. And you mentioned this about how you were noticing this with yourself as well, right? Like you weren't super excited to like run into work, and just you lost, I guess, some of that drive as well for exercise and whatnot. So, but we have to check in to get that data. And then with that, we can make we can empower ourselves to take some subtle edits in the path or on the path.
I like your point about the seasons. I think that for me is like the biggest one, where I know I can check in and go, where am I? And so it's like you talk to any performance coach or performance psychologist, there are cycles of, rest, recovery, bloom, or training, and then game day. And you just go through those cycles over and over again. But nobody can just stay in training and game day forever. It's not realistic, right? And so it's like, how do we start to identify better at work, whatever it is that you're doing, where you are needing to add in some form of rest, some form of recovery, and also trusting that you'll come back to the point that, you already perform at, if not higher. Because I think sometimes with overachieving, or with people who are very, into their work, you can almost feel that like stopping feels like an ending. Stopping might mean you never come back, you never bounce back. But the reality is, no, resting allows you to recover, and then you come back better.
Yeah. But I think you have to, I love that. And I love the physical analogy. And I think what works in those situations is that there's pretty strict planning. And that's where, this is the stuff that excites me the most when, on the professional side, working with teams, because it's, if you can look at, and you can do this individually, if you can look at the next quarter, and, whether that's you're working on a product launch or strategy, like whatever it is, taking a look at the big milestones that you have and knowing that, okay, I've got to go kind of all out here. But right now, while I'm not in that, what can I pre-plant into the schedule that has some rest and recovery built in there? And it's a non-negotiable, right? And you make that commitment to yourself now. And if even better, if you do this as a team and you're sitting down and like, okay, just like you plan out the tactics to support the brand strategy. Okay, we're going to do these things, but we're also going to integrate some rest and recovery here. And what does that look like? And, there's individual, but there's also team stuff that could be as simple as, building in some mental fitness to your status calls. Start the project status calls with 5 or 10 minutes of some breath work and just checking in as a group. What's coming up for you? It doesn't have to be these giant, you don't have to go and book a corporate offsite to do this, is my point. Right? Great. Like if you want to do that, great. And I'll be there. But I'm talking about the micro moments, right? Because those things stack and they're exponential. And then we don't get to these points where we're at we hit this massive wall.
So what I love about kind of the differences I'm hearing you talk about our work, and I won't say mine's completely opposite, but it's like I got to this because I wanted to look at how people live a meaningful life.
Yeah.
What does that mean? And to really explore the human experience and our agency within it, right? The ways in which we can put ourselves in the way of a meaningful life versus hoping it happens to us. Yours is much more like every day, in any moment, you can come back to practices that do put you in the way of a meaningful life, but they must be done in these sort of, or not must be done, but the value of them is that they're simple, short, sweet, and potentially daily. Right. So it's sort of like the blend of how do you do this at a larger scale, but then how do you show up every day to do this? Because that's what compounds to lead to a meaningful life, right? It's like you can't just know that gratitude is one of the most powerful exercises you can do for your brain and, not plot out when you're going to do it, right? And how you're going to make it happen and how you do it quickly. And I mean, that was one of the practices that I picked up as we're talking about, some of the ways that we decided what's a non-negotiable and what's not as far as development. Like mine is my 5-minute journal, and in that journal, I have to write three points of gratitude. What would make the day great? One affirmation. And then I have to look at the end of the day and say, what did make the day great? How was this day magic? I heard someone say the other day when they wake up, it was an entrepreneur, I forget who it was, but he said, every day I wake up and I say something magical is going to happen today. I was like, I love that. And then at the end of the day, you go, well, what was it? Right. So that's one of the practices that I found that was really powerful that I will probably use forever. Right. It's a non-negotiable. For me, meditation of some kind is a non-negotiable every day. And the other that I know for sure is 30 minutes of some sort of exercise, even if it's just a nice walk, is a non-negotiable. But, and so those are some of the ways that I think about, really just honing in on what matters most and letting everything else go while I'm in this season, which I don't know what I'd call this season. It's probably rest. It's a bit of rest and recovery is what I'd call it. How about for you?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I didn't really realize this until the way you're describing both of our work, which is there's this beautiful synergy. Because I mean, for me, I think I'm just trying to, you're like step one in the process around, or at least the way I see it, of describing and spending some time, setting some intentions and understanding like what does a meaningful life look and feel like to me. And then, my work doesn't exist without that introspection, because then the mental fitness is, okay, well, if that's what it is, and that may evolve over time, let's accept that. But then how can we support, that existence and that journey for ourselves on a daily basis through these practices and these rituals and routines and so forth. So it really does, it's so synergistic. We should just combine the shows. I'm just saying.
You come to New York.
Exactly. I will do that. No problem. Sorry. And what was your question?
Yeah, Mark, I would love to know, I shared my kind of 3 practices in my space of my taking my own personal development sort of sabbatical. I'm curious what are your must-haves that you would recommend people try out, even if it's not the thing that works perfectly for them? Yeah.
So my non-negotiable, and this hasn't always been a non-negotiable. This came from the podcast and listening to others and so forth. So there's always beautiful opportunities to just try new things. And for me, it was guided breath work. And just, it looks different every day. Sometimes it's a little bit longer. Sometimes it's shorter. But what is the non-negotiable is, even if I wake up and let's say the sleep was off, I've got young children, so sometimes they really mess with that sleep schedule. The thing I'm 100% doing is at least 2 minutes of guided breath work, which sounds so insignificant, but the benefits, at least for me, are just in starting the day with those 2 minutes, I feel like I've started the day on my own terms, versus when I don't do that, I'm starting in this like survivor mode.
That's it.
Right?
Yeah.
And you're just playing catch up all day. So it's 2 minutes, but it completely reframes the entire day. So for me, it's breathing. And then for sure, my journaling practice has evolved to just be, I mean, there are staple moments, kind of like you, the beginning and the end, but I just kind of use it when needed at this point as well. If something comes up middle of the day, I'm not going to let the mind stew and spin. I'm just going to take a few seconds and write that out, or leave myself an audio note, or take a walk and just think and process and let that go within minutes so it doesn't hijack the rest of my day. Yeah.
All right, Mark, I'm going to ask you some rapid fire questions because I want to know a few things about what's going on for you right now. And I want people to get some of your expertise. You wrote a book called Personal Socrates, and we talked about that a while ago, about questions to ask ourselves. What's a question you think everyone could ask themselves right now?
Oh, love it. This is always so hard because, I mean, as you know, I curate and collect questions. So there are thousands of them circulating around. But the one that is intuitively surfacing right now is, what am I really hearing in this moment? Like, what is my higher self telling me right now? You put the circumstance, the event, whatever it is, and just take a minute and zoom up, and the way I frame this is the version of me that is 80 plus years old and has lived a lot of life and has soaked up a lot of wisdom. What is that person telling me right now?
Ooh, I like that. What do you wish you knew about mental fitness before you started?
I wish I knew how accessible it was, because I had judgment on not even mental fitness, because that term didn't exist, but I had judgment on these practices: sound healing, breath work.
Yes.
Breath work? What are you talking about? Like,
you're
where's
insane.
That? Yeah, where's that coming from? I mean, cue up the robe and beads, which nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. But
and the white linen.
Exactly, right? And that's how I even got into a lot of the astrology, work. I remember I had Jill Winterstein from Spirit Daughter on the show, and I'm like, well, if I'm journaling already, why wouldn't I tap into some, higher energy that literally has the power to move water around in our world? I don't understand it all, but there's no downside in me asking some really intentional questions in key kind of astrological moments. So I guess I'd refine the answer to say, I wish I had less judgment around mental fitness and just approached it wide open, because I feel like it'd be even farther down the road.
What do you wish you could tell every skeptic about mental fitness or personal development?
I mean, kind of a bold statement, but what do you have to lose? What's the downside in trying something like this? And here's where I may ruffle some feathers, but is what you're doing working?
How's that working for you? Yeah, I love that. I thought of that too. Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like we can ask that question in so many different areas, not just within our personal lives, but just in big systems and professional life and work and whatnot. Because we get so hung up on ideas and ways of doing things and whatnot. If we just take a minute and a couple breaths and zoom out, like, well, is that working for us? Like, often the answer is no. Well, then at least we can try some different approaches. Right?
What mistakes have you made in mental fitness since starting on the journey?
I think probably what tied to the reason we're having this conversation, I think it's just going too hard on mental fitness and getting wrapped up in, so these are the limiting beliefs. So I can't stay stuck on the limiting beliefs because what I think about comes about, and just getting stuck in these loops of, I'm self-sabotaging myself right now. I realize that, but just slow down, take a breath. I mean, there's validity to a lot of this stuff, but sometimes you just need to live and just be, right? Oof. Just be. So I think that's the intention for the season moving forward. Let's just be, at least for me.
I agree. It's the reason I think we're having this conversation, is because it's like, how do we find a way, or not even how do we find a way, but what's the point of all this work if you're not just going out and living?
Yeah.
What's the point of all of this if you aren't just experiencing life? And you don't have to be, equipped with every single tool and every single piece of information and the ability to psychoanalyze everyone in your life, including yourself, at any moment so that you can understand things deeper. It's like, it's just not that deep sometimes. If you just go out and live. I remember I talked to Deepak Chopra. It was, I don't know, months ago. And I said, he wrote a new book called Quantum Healing or Quantum Body. And I said, what do you think people would do differently if they knew what you know? And he, in essence, said they would live so lightly. They would laugh. They would have humor. It just wouldn't be that serious, was kind of his point. And I was like, how funny and how ironic in this world, in this space, that's so what someone who's been doing this work his whole life would say.
Yeah.
All right. So, Mark, I'm going to have you complete these 3 statements for me.
Okay.
I know, just all the things.
I love it.
Better humans are
connected.
Better work is.
Ooh, better work is lighter.
And a better world has
more love.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here.
Can I ask you one final rapid fire?
Of course.
Okay. For Leah, in the season that you're in right now, what feelings do you want to be celebrating at the end of that season?
I want to be celebrating buoyancy. Like, that word came up for me today. I haven't used it ever, but yeah, buoyance.
Buoyance.
I want to be feeling buoyant. I want to be feeling easy. That feeling of just kind of floating along. It's all good.
I love that.
Yeah.
Amazing. Buoyancy, lighter. Looks like there's some themes in this one.
Yeah, exactly. More to talk about. Mark, thank you for being here today. I love getting to just jam with you and see where we go. So thanks for playing along.
Oh, right back at you.